Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating, honestly kind of mind-boggling financial contradiction at the very heart of the modern sports business. We're looking at a recent event called UFC Freedom 250, and it raises a massive question for us to figure out. Why would the most successful combat sports promotion in history intentionally absorb a massive, multi-million dollar financial loss in a single night? It's a story of pure spectacle, high-stakes strategy, and corporate gambles. And it actually tells us a lot about the current landscape of sports entertainment. Negative $30 million. Yeah, you heard that right. The UFC intentionally took a $30 million net loss on this single event. In an industry where the bottom line is fiercely, almost obsessively protected, this kind of intentional deficit is practically unheard of. It immediately begs the question of what the ultimate goal could possibly be when a notoriously profit-driven company willingly bleeds this much cash.
Okay, let's dive into this. To understand this totally unprecedented financial decision, we really need to look at the staggering scale and the highly specific details of what was, essentially, a custom-built spectacle on the lawn of the White House. You know, this wasn't your standard Saturday night arena show. This was designed from the ground up to be something the world had literally never seen before.
So picture this, June 14, 2026. To celebrate the 250th anniversary of the United States, the UFC staged Freedom 250 right on the White House South Lawn. They constructed this absolute behemoth of a 600-ton steel archway known as the Claw, rising 92 feet into the air. But here is the absolute kicker for their business model. There were only 4,300 seats, and every single one of them was invite-only. The crowd was made up entirely of military personnel, political allies, and corporate sponsors. Because not a single public ticket was sold, this massive custom-built stadium event generated absolutely $0 in gate revenue. Producing a spectacle of this magnitude on the grounds of the presidential residence cost a staggering $60 million. And because there was no gate revenue to offset that massive production budget, it took a huge toll on the bottom line. According to TKO Group Holdings, which is the parent company of the UFC, their chief financial officer, Andrew Schleimer, confirmed during a Q2 earnings call that the $60 million production cost heavily impacted their profit margins. We're talking a drop from a very healthy 59% the previous year, all the way down to 52%. The astronomical financial hit was so severe that even UFC CEO Dana White, a man whose entire brand is pretty much built on a go big or go home philosophy, was shockingly blunt about the cost. His reaction to the final bill was simple, and honestly slightly humorous given the sheer scale of what they just pulled off. He basically just said, "I can't afford it. We'll never do this again." Section 1. A masterclass in brand exposure, justifying the corporate gamble. So how on earth does a corporate board justify blowing that kind of money? Well, by viewing it as an incredibly aggressive branding investment. TKO leadership claimed that while they lost $30 million in cold hard cash, the event actually generated over $1 billion in what they call earned media value. By leveraging the totally unprecedented high-status location of the White House, they were able to court and secure 25 brand new marketing partners. And we aren't just talking about traditional sports sponsors here. They brought in massive high-tech and defense firms like Anduril and Elon Musk's Starlink. And the global reach was undeniably massive, giving those sponsors an unprecedented stage to shine on. An average of 8.2 million viewers tuned in from the United States, but the international poll was even bigger, bringing in 25.8 million viewers from the rest of the world. That is a total global reach of 34 million people. Broadcast exclusively on Paramount+, this spectacle literally became the most watched live event in the entire history of the platform. Section 2. Bread, circuses, and backlash, the political reaction. Now, you can't build a 92-foot steel fighting cage at the White House without stepping on a few toes, right? The political friction was immediate. First off, the event was held on June 14th, which holds dual significance as both Flag Day and Donald Trump's 80th birthday. Watchdog groups like the Public Integrity Project actually filed lawsuits aiming to block the fights, arguing that giving a private, for-profit company unfettered access to national monuments was highly inappropriate. The media reaction was equally critical, with the Associated Press going so far as to compare the event to the bread and circuses of Imperial Rome, which is a historical term for using spectacular games to basically distract the public. And that pushback was heavily reflected in public opinion, too. According to a Reuters poll conducted right around the event, only 16% of Americans actually felt that holding a professional cage match on the South Lawn of the White House was appropriate. Section 3. The Fighter Pay Controversy. Who actually pays for the spectacle? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is we're pivoting from a 16% public approval rating to another critical 16%. Fighter pay. While the UFC was perfectly fine spending $60 million on a single night of brand exposure, take a look at the massive disparity in how they compensate their labor force compared to other major sports. Through collective bargaining agreements, athletes in the NBA, NHL, and MLB receive roughly 50% of their league's revenue. The NFL is right behind them at about 47%. Meanwhile, historically, UFC athletes receive between just 16 and 20% of the promotion's total revenue. To really give this data a human voice, we can look at the direct frustration of the athletes themselves. Prominent contender Jorge Masvidal famously highlighted this exact discrepancy, asking why his share is only 18% while basketball and baseball players make 50%. He pointedly asked, does the cage cost so much to set up? A question that hits incredibly hard when you consider the company literally just spent $60 million setting up a cage in Washington, D.C. Section 4. Legal and competitive threats, disruptors, and courtrooms. This deep, boiling dissatisfaction over revenue sharing has kicked the door wide open for major disruptors. In July 2026, YouTube star turned promoter Jake Paul announced that his company, Most Valuable Promotions, had merged with the Professional Fighters League, or PFL. Their core promise is explicitly designed to target the UFC's vulnerabilities. They announced a fighter-first superfight division that promises to offer athletes that heavily desired 50% revenue split. And this brilliantly illustrates the complexity of the fight business. Imagine finally reaching the very top of your profession, only to find out it triggers a clause trapping you there without any leverage. That's the paradox of the automatic renewal clause. While the PFL promises a 50% revenue share on one hand, investigative looks into their contracts reveal a pretty stark reality on the other: the use of these automatic renewals. If a fighter becomes a champion, they are automatically locked into contract extensions that they cannot refuse, severely limiting their free agency. Now, this contractual tactic is highly controversial because it's actually been outlawed in the other major combat sport for quite some time. The Ali Act is a federal law enacted 25 years ago in boxing, specifically to protect fighters from coercive contracts. It explicitly banned these exact automatic renewal clauses. But because mixed martial arts is not covered by the Ali Act, labor rights in the sport remain a deeply controversial and highly litigated gray area. All of this builds into a massive existential threat for the promotion. The UFC's greatest battle right now isn't against a rival promoter at all. It's a legal war taking place in Nevada courtrooms. Over a decade ago, fighters began filing antitrust lawsuits over wage suppression. In early 2025, a judge approved a massive $375 million settlement for over 1,100 former fighters in the Lee versus Suffolk case. But the fight isn't over. A second case representing current fighters, Johnson versus Suffolk, remains highly active and incredibly dangerous for the promotion. To understand just how dangerous this active lawsuit really is, we need to understand this legal term: terminating sanctions. This is a severe legal penalty that a judge can issue due to extreme misconduct during a trial. If issued, it can result in an automatic loss or a default judgment against the offending party, basically bypassing a jury entirely. So in the active Johnson versus Zuffa case, the plaintiffs have alleged that UFC leadership willfully destroyed years of critical electronic evidence. If the judge agrees with this allegation and actually issues terminating sanctions, the UFC could instantly face billions of dollars in damages. And here is why this is absolutely crucial. For a business entirely reliant on keeping labor costs low, being legally forced to completely rewrite how you sign and retain talent is an apocalyptic scenario. So we come back to the $30 million gamble on the South Lawn. The UFC has proven it's a global powerhouse, fully capable of capturing the world's attention and generating massive enterprise value. But there is an undeniable and rapidly growing tension between creating those billion-dollar media spectacles and the ongoing allegations of suppressing the very labor force that bleeds for that revenue. As legal fees mount and new competitors emerge, someone has to foot the bill. Which leaves us with this final thought to consider, based on the source material we've explored today. As the promotion navigates billion-dollar lawsuits and $30 million single-night losses, we really have to ask, is the UFC's iron grip dominance ultimately good for the growth and stability of the sport? Or has the time finally come for athletes to receive a 50% revenue split? It is a deeply complex issue, and the outcome of these looming legal battles will undoubtedly shape the future of combat sports forever.